Hello and welcome to the Varietal Show. Now, we had a little surge in popularity this week with the Lovecraft video. Well, it wasn't Lovecraft, it was Hodgson, who's a big influence on Lovecraft. So if you haven't watched that, by the way, it is our best performing video of all time. And which means it's doing okay in YouTube terms. But check that out on Tuesday, the Tuesday show, Fireside Fairy Tales, if you guys haven't. Because I did some new things. I added some sound effects, did some voices, whatever else. But that means that we have a lot of people here who don't know what this is, or potentially could. So I'm just going to give you a brief rundown of what the Varietal Show is, and then we'll get into it, because it takes some time, and I don't want to waste your time. My name is Rory. This is Varietal Literature. It's a group of writers from Vancouver. I am an author. And we have a website that has my writing. Right now I'm highlighting my horror stuff, mostly from last year, which is a choose your own adventure horror house, and a actual sort of Lovecraftian era letters with horrifying revelations in them kind of style of writing down in the description below, called Strange Place for a Gallery. I don't know the name of my own story. So those are things you can check out if you like horror. What we're doing today is, no, we're not reading horror stories. We do that Tuesdays at 6:30 p.m. for the month of October, and then we do sort of folk tales that are seasonally appropriate on that same day throughout the rest of the year. However, given how popular the horror one was on Tuesday, I am considering doing a monthly horror story on Tuesday. Let me know if that's a thing that interests you, either in the comments here or in reply to this video, and I may start to fit that into the schedule. With that said, what this show is the writing. It's where a group of people, there's a live chat right there, come in and we write stuff together, and it's generally pretty silly. Sometimes we write serious stuff, but mostly it's pretty silly. You can write your own stuff and put it in the chat, and as long as it's not, wildly racist or weirdly sexual, I'll probably read it aloud. Or you can throw ideas my way if you're not really the writing on your own type, and I'll try to integrate it into really short little snapshot stories that are based around certain prompts or ideas. We call those lit games. So it takes about an hour. We usually write about 2 or 3 stories. And today, we're figuring out ways to make horror out of fruit, which sounds stupid because it is. And I see Jenna is here. Jenna says, hello! Well, hello, Jenna! Woo, nice. I'm assuming about the video. I mean, I love horror, so that sounds cool. By the way, I was going to say, if you guys did come in on the Lovecraft video, you should check out in that same playlist, Fireside Fairy Tales playlist on the channel, you should check out 3 weeks ago I did a story called The Boy Who Went with the Fairies, and holy crap, did that scare the crap out of me. I may be alone in that, but for me it was one of the scariest stories. At that point I wasn't using sound effects and it was a little less dramatic, so it might not ring the same, but the story itself is strong. Alright, which means it's time for me to talk about tonight's lit game. So lit game stands for literature game, and what it is myself, a writer, will use a Google Doc and start writing stuff that chat is going to help me along with. Sometimes just throwing ideas, sometimes they throw a sentence in there or a feature about the character. So feel free to join in, and I'll try to integrate as many as I can, of course within limits of my own creativity. And we'll try our best to sort of rapid fire make 3 little stories, or at least starts of stories, just because I love writing. And if you love writing too, we're gonna have fun. So Jenna, what we're doing tonight, because I see Jenna's in the chat, what we're doing tonight is we're going to try and make, I know it sounds weird, but it's worked every time so far. We've done this in various forms 3 times, and each time it's one of our best. We did this with coffee, and we did this with potatoes, which was where it started. But what we're going to do is we're going to take fruit, and we're going to try and make storybook characters out of them, sort of themed around fruit. In this case, in a horror setting. Now, that doesn't mean that the fruit has to be the monster. There could be a fruit town that's terrorized by a monster, for example. But it just has to work around the theme of fruit in sort of storybook style. So, Jenna, I want you to pick a fruit, and anybody else out there in Chatland who wants to jump in and throw a suggestion for a fruit, go for it. I'm going to get myself a drink of water because it is still quite smoky where I live and grating on my throat, unfortunately. Jenna says, this is perfect because I do ask people what would happen if they suddenly woke up as a sentient bowl of fruit, but picking a fruit, I would say pears. Okay. Are we going to make pears the villains or the victims or both? You know what? What sort of essential? Because the trick here is like to write a story, but to come on, weave into that story essential pearness. Like it can't just be a story where like it could be a little boy, but it's just a pear. What does something pears do other than not taste good? I know that's subjective. I don't really like pears. I find them really gritty. Well, they're poached. What about the pear murderer? Pear murderer. We're going pear murderer. One of the things I do appreciate is if you have pear puns about this. Let's do kind of like a slasher flick with pears. Jenna says, I think pears are sort of the underdogs of fruit. They're not quite apples. Okay, two-tier society with apples on top. I think our coffee one was a two-tier society too. Okay. Let's start our world building here. So, 'twas a brisk fall evening. Remember those? Remember when it was brisk in fall? It's like summer out there right now. 'Twas a brisk fall evening when the small district of Pear Square was rocked by a shriek. I think there's probably going to be a lot of coughing today. I'm afraid to say. No real avoiding it when the world is a cigarette. When the small district of Pear Square was rocked by a shriek. They clambered out their widened doors in their tailor-made pants, for so few off the shelf would fit a common pear. To investigate the disturbance. I'm looking for more pear puns, Jenna, so go nuts with that. To investigate the disturbance. They clambered out their widened doors in their tailor-made pants, for so few off the shelf would to investigate the disturbance. Why have I just gone blank here for a minute? I had it somewhere I was going. The district was not a wealthy one. It didn't revel in its luxuries. Like the high streets of golden apple. Oh, what's another apple? Let's just leave it with that. Like the high streets of golden apple, where the snobbish and powerful apples roamed. Yet it was richer in connections for it. So it was no surprise that a good half the neighborhood ran to investigate. None were prepared for what they found, though. Perry Error. A lovely young fruit that warmed many with his generous smile. Was stripped of his hide and steaming with a sweet syrup that turned his guts to soft mush before their horrified eyes. Jenna says, I'm trying to think of something clever with pear and pear for pun. I mean, there's au pair. With a sweet syrup that turned his guts to soft mush before their horrified eyes. Like, how do you make a pear death gory? I guess you just have to kind of adopt an empathetic position with the pears, so... A veteran, old... I need a name for an old man that is a pun with pear. Pearl. I'm just gonna go with Pearl for now. Old Pearl. A veteran. Jenna says, okay, fermented pears smell rank. One of my childhood friends had a pear tree in her backyard. Hey, we could do zombie pears. Maybe that's where we turn this. Pearl Pearson. A veteran of the Apple Wars. Fainted on the spot. Perry, for his part, was beyond words. His eyes seemed tearful before they sloughed. That's not how you spell sloughed. Sloughed away with his face into a pie filling, spread steaming across the cobblestones of Pear Square. Jenna says zombie pears, yes. Listen, pears turn super mushy, goopy and brown. Okay. Well, then we're gonna have to kind of like cut some time out, otherwise this will take forever. So for this, for several months. Just Fleece It Out says, the way Perry the pear used to parry other pears. All right, that's going in. That is going in. A veteran of the Apple Wars. Where? Whoops. Perry actually, I'm gonna misspell this and make it parrot, because we already have a Perry. Where Parrot the pear used to parry other pears. That sided with the pear. That sided with the violent apples. His eyes seemed tearful before they sloughed away with... Okay, for several months, there were pear protests. Man, okay, here's something for chat. Pear protest signs about, like, inaction on discovering the murderer of Perry Error. Which is one of the stupidest puns I've ever made. I don't even know if it counts as a pun. I think it's just wordplay at this point. For several months, there were protests in Pear Square that often were suppressed by the shiny, round, and arrogant faces of the great red apple people. These riots were fierce but unproductive. The pear poaching. See, now that's a pun. Because I'm using poaching in both ways. He's poaching them like a hunter. And he's poaching them in liquid. I think that's probably the peak. Have a good night. Okay, no, I'm kidding. I just don't think I'm going to do better than the pear poaching monster of Pear Square. Ran free Sorry, just a second. That was very strange. Sorry, my music did a weird thing. The para-poaching monster of Para Square ran free free and undiscovered in the back alleys of Pear. The good Pear City. I don't know. Though many it was hardly more than a few days before someone Pearsville, like Parksville, but for pears. There we go. In the good Pearsville County. It was hardly more than a few days before someone would peel another pear in some other corner, and they would be found sweetened and steaming upon the road. Ugh. Okay, now we need some action. It's been a lot of description. There's setup. It was Private Detective Delicious. Golden Delicious. From the Apple Districts. That ended up coming to their aid. It's doubtful he was very into Secretary Granny Smith. His assistant, how about? Ended up coming to their aid. It's doubtful he was very charitable. He probably just liked the challenge. I think this is going to be a story day. If I don't get this moving. Probably just liked the challenge. Or maybe it was his sprightly... Is that right? Why does that look wrong? That looks wrong to me. It's this. Maybe it was his sprightly, effervescent assistant, Granny Smith, that melted his seeds and let his care grow. Whatever it was, Pear Square was relieved that someone was investigating. Their investigation brought them To a great old warehouse. Cutting out a lot of stuff here that I would normally put in. Okay, what do I feel for Granny Smith's? A little bit tart. Hey, Goldilocks. Looks like you were right. The mud here is the same sandy mud we found at the scene. Granny winked. Is that a thing people do? In the middle of conversations, just wink? Of course I was right. No apple is sharper in the details than I. He grumbled. I seem to recall it was I who found that mud. She added. Yes, but you didn't know what to do with it. I made it a clue. He sneered. I think someone here needs to make a clue. Mumbled Granny Smith. The lock was chipped off. Their first clue. Their first, too much clue. First confirmation that this was the right. Tell me more, Jenna, about these rotten pears. Because we're getting to Rotten Pear Town now. This was the right lead. Something was very wrong. Very wrong? Something was dreadfully wrong. Very is a crutch word. The room was wound through with a smell of bitter wine, too rich and sweet for anyone's taste, but a September wasp's. Save for a September wasp? Yeah. Save for a September wasp. The sour fumes were piercing and stirred the detective's stomach. Granny began to speak, but was hushed. by Golden. He pointed at the ground ahead, and there was a river most foul of brown, textured fluid oozing about crates as a thick syrup. From a broken bottle. Jenna says, okay, so they are gunky, mushy, and the smell is sour and pungent. They leak brown juice. They definitely make awful squish sounds if you accidentally step on them. Oh, that's good to know. And are slipping hazards. I mean, rotted pears also just turn brown and black when they get really rank. Granny was gripped with fear for a moment. She was clever. Perhaps the most clever in the duo. But she wasn't in for the rough stuff the job sometimes brought. Any hope she had that it was just a bootlegger was dashed by the low gurgling of something ahead. Whatever it was, rubbed against a lamp. Whatever it was, crossed a light and left a lurching shadow tall against the warehouse windows. Golden and delicious. Big Drew says, greeting friends, just a quick drop in as I'm about to make dinner for a friend who's hosting me while I'm in Canada. I'm calling myself Apple Drew for this late games. Hello, Big Drew. It's good to see you. We are talking about pears. Zombie pears at this point. Golden Delicious turned towards Golden Delicious turned towards I'm forgetting my own names. Granny. And whispered, actually wait, Golden Delicious pulled his back up to a wall just before the corner where the shadow was being cast. He pressed up against a crate and turned towards Granny to whisper, "When I say go." She nodded, but barely began to do so before a spritz of fresh, horrid apple juice sprayed out from the screaming Detective Golden Delicious. Whoa! Sorry for the headphones users. She scrambled and pulled at his arm as a terrible shadow of some leaking, molded beast dragged him, hold as she could. He screamed like she's never heard a fruit scream. And his arm tore off in her hands. Now sticky with fresh amber juice. Oh, Jenna has an excellent one there. Well, we have to get out of here. Will be apple crumble. Okay, I'm gonna add that in. No! Fight! Goldie! She cried, but before her unfolded a horror that had never been seen before, never been beheld by a sane fruit since. He gets apple gobbled instead of clobbered. Okay. Golden Delicious. Detective Golden. Detective Delicious. How have I not done that so far? Detective Delicious was apple cobbled by a ravenous and possessed crowd of mushy, brown, skinless pears. He cried and cried with each savage strike, spraying out another stream of fresh, I love the idea that this is delicious, fresh apple juice. To mingle with the brown, oozing essence of the swarm of, I hate using of twice in a row like that, of undead pears. For indeed, it was then that it became clear. These were the slaughtered pairs of pair square resurrected by some terrible science of the occult. Big Drew says, my connection is weak, but I gotta run. You guys are awesome. Yeah, it's good to see you, Big Drew. Cobblered. Resurrected by some terrible science of the cult. As the detective's arm fell weak and truly dead upon the applesauce. I think I can make this rhyme. That had been his head. The brown abominations began to sprint for dear Granny Smith. She ran pale into the street, screaming, and tossed behind her the oil lantern I had certainly, definitely described her having, and I'm absolutely not retconning right now for narrative convenience. Which set ablaze those terrible creatures, and indeed the whole warehouse. Or at least Jenna says, listen, it came out of the same space that anime characters pull out their giant hammers for a gag. Is that a thing in anime? I know that's a thing in, like, Looney Tunes. I didn't know that was a thing in anime. I don't know anime that well. I mean, I'm not a complete noob, but I don't know it that well. Unfortunately. Or at least, that's her story. Few believe it. She sits in the madhouse, screaming most nights, saying that the fall is coming, and with it, the terrible plights of two old pairs. I could do better than that. Terrible, terrible pear poacher. And the dark forces that resurrect them. It is fall now, though. And yes, the killings have continued. But nothing so mad and untoward. Up here in the Apple District, where decency reigns supreme, the only disturbance I notice is a strange, sweet wine that catches on the wind. Up from Pear Square. All right. Well, I can't believe I only got one story done. But I imagine this was a pretty light stream, lightly attended stream. I can't see the numbers, but I'm sure it's very small. I just have that vibe. So, if you're coming to this part of the show, you're probably jumping ahead just to hear the story. We tried to make like a horror character based around pears. Not so much horror character, some sort of horror story based around the essence of being a pear, silly as that sounds. And I think we came up with something, myself and Jenna, and a few contributions from Big Drew in the chat. So I'm going to read you that story now. Wait. Every time, gotta remember, gotta get the creepy music. Although I think this one really doesn't justify it. 'Twas a brisk fall evening when the small district of Pear Square was rocked by a shriek. They clambered out their widened doors in their tailor-made pants, for so few off the shelf would fit a common pair, to investigate the disturbance. The district was not a wealthy one. It didn't revel in its luxuries like the high streets of Golden Apple, where the snobbish and powerful apples roamed. Yet it was richer in connections for it, so it was no surprise that a good half of the neighborhood ran to investigate the scream. None were prepared for what they found, though. Perry Error, a lovely young fruit that warmed many with his generous smile, was stripped of his hide and steaming with a sweet syrup that turned his guts to soft mush before their horrified eyes. Old Parrot Parson, a veteran of the apple wars, where Parrot the pear used to parry other pears that sided with violent apples, fainted on the spot. Perry, for his part, was beyond words. His eyes seemed tearful before they sloughed away with his face into a pie-filling spread steaming across the cobblestones of Pear Square. For several months there were protests in Pear Square that often were suppressed by the shiny round and arrogant faces of the great red apple people. These riots were fierce but unproductive. The pear-poaching monster of Pear Square ran free and undiscovered in the back alleys in the good Pearsville County. It was hardly more than a few days before someone would peel another pear in some other corner, and they would be found sweetened and steaming upon the road. It was a private detective, delicious, golden delicious, from the apple districts that ended up coming to their aid. It's doubtful he was very charitable. He probably just liked the challenge. Or maybe it was his sprightly and effervescent assistant, Granny Smith, that melted his seeds and let his care grow. Whatever it was, Pear Square was relieved that someone was investigating. These two investigations brought them to a great old warehouse. "Hey, Goldilocks, looks like you were right. The mud here is the same sandy mud we found at the scene," Granny winked. "Of course I was right. No apple is sharper in the details than I," he grumbled. "I seem to recall it was I who found that mud," she added. "Yes, but you didn't know what to do with it. I made it a clue," he sneered. "I think someone here needs to make a clue," mumbled Granny Smith. The lock was chipped off. This was their first confirmation that this was the right lead. Something was dreadfully wrong. The room was wound through with a smell of bitter wine. too rich and sweet for anyone's taste save for a September wasp's. The sour fumes were piercing and stirred the detective's stomach. Granny began to speak, but was hushed by Golden. He pointed at the ground ahead, and there was a river most foul of brown, textured fluid oozing about crates as a thick syrup from a broken bottle. Granny was gripped with fear for a moment. She was clever, perhaps the most clever in the duo, but she wasn't in for the rough stuff the job sometimes brought. Any hope she had that it was just a bootlegger was dashed by the low gurgling of something ahead. Whatever it was crossed a light left and left a lurching shadow tall against the warehouse windows. Golden Delicious pulled his back up to a wall just before the corner where the shadow was being cast. He pressed up against the crate and turned towards Granny to whisper, "When I say go." She nodded, but barely had begun to do so before a spritz of fresh, horrid apple juice sprayed out from the screaming Detective Golden Delicious. She scrambled to pull at his arm as a terrible shadow of some leaking, molded beast dragged him. Hold as she could, he screamed like she's never heard a fruit scream, and his arm tore off into her hands, now sticky with fresh amber juice. "No! Fight, Goldie! We've got to get out of here, or we'll be apple crumble!" she cried, but before her unfolded a horror that had never been seen, never been beheld by a sane fruit since. Detective Delicious was apple-cobbled by a ravenous and possessed crowd of mushy brown skinless pears. He cried and cried with savage strikes, spraying out another stream of fresh apple juice to mingle with the brown oozing essence that the swarm of attacking and undead pears brought upon him. For indeed it was then that it became clear that these were the slaughtered pears of Paris Square, resurrected by some terrible science of the occult. As the detective arm fell weak and truly dead upon the applesauce that had been his head, the brown abominations began to sprint for dear Granny Smith. She ran pale into the street, screaming, and tossed behind her the oil lantern I had definitely described her having, and I'm absolutely not retconning right now for narrative convenience, which set ablaze those terrible creatures, and indeed the whole warehouse. Or at least, that's her story. Few believe it. She sits in the madhouse screaming most nights, saying that the fall is coming, and with it, the terrible pear poacher, and the dark forces that resurrect them. It is fall now, though, and yes, the killings have continued, but nothing so mad and untoward have come of them. Up here in the Apple District, there where decency reigns supreme, the only disturbance I notice is a strange, sweet whine that catches on the wind up from Paris Square sometimes. All right. Well, that was dumb and fun. Which I think pretty much will wrap us right up. Well, thank you, Jenna, for coming by. If this is the first Varietal show you watched, hope you enjoyed it. If you didn't, that's okay. Jenna says, the pear wine is also a chilling detail. Like, the apples are drinking the pears. I think it was meant to imply that there is still a horde of undead coming to kill them. Jess says, I caught the farewell. That's all right. It was a quiet night here on the Varietal show. Just a reminder that next week, you want to check your schedule and clear it, because unless something terribly goes wrong, which is possible, Next Thursday at 6:30, we'll be doing yet another Choose Your Own Adventure live, which is where you get 3 lives, and you as a chat make choices on a Choose Your Own Adventure that I have written. This one is about a weapons silo that has haunted and terrible things in it. And you try to make as far as you can in an hour without running out of lives. Chat. And then, last year no one made it. So I don't expect anyone to make it this year. It's not exactly fair. It's more silly and extremely violent. It's not for kids. These are not for kids. If you have not seen it, we did it last year. You can check the Varietal show. It's called the Horror House or something like that. If I remember, I'll put a little card up here when this is done. But anyways, that'll be next week. Come in and see how far you can make it. And then afterwards, when I'm done, I usually post it up and you guys can see how far you can make it on your own. And as always, thank you so much for coming. If you enjoyed the show, please remember to like and subscribe. Though the most important thing that you can do is to let your friends know if you enjoyed it, or people you think might enjoy this. Just let them know. We do a book club, though it's not currently on. It should be up next month, actually. On Wednesdays, we do the storytelling. On Tuesdays, and we do story writing here on Thursdays on the Varietal show. If any of that interests you, you pass it on. And if you want to go that step further, if you have the money and are able to, I have a little donation link where you can buy me a coffee if I've entertained you. But that is absolutely not an obligation. And most of all, I just enjoy the company of people and writing together. Which, on that note, means that I got to go cash out. You do not have to go home, but you can't stay here. Get out of my shop.